Welcome. My name is Artur Rosman. I am the editor-in-chief of Church Life Journal and an associate research professor here at the McGrath Institute at the University of Notre Dame. Welcome to the Philosophy of Drama panel. The book in question is right there. It's also available in the back corner over there. Our panelists are Professors Krzysztof Zanussi, Artur Grabowski, and Paweł Rojek. I would like to thank them for taking time out of their busy schedules to discuss my translation of Father Józef Tischner's The Philosophy of Drama. Before I introduce our esteemed guests, I'd like to give you some context for the book. Here it is in 2 paragraphs. Tischner's main conversation partners are Levinas, Hegel, Heidegger, the Bible, and literary figures such as Shakespeare, Kierkegaard, and Tolstoy. The historical context is also important, especially for readers not familiar with 20th century Polish history. The book is an answer to the horrors of World War II, the communist occupation of Poland, and it was written as a kind of running commentary on the partial disintegration of the Solidarity movement in Poland, of which Tischner was the unofficial chaplain after its initial success. The book starts with the experience of evil, and asks how we might each reach toward the good in trying circumstances. In some ways, it's a little bit like Hans Urs von Balthasar's Theodrama, except like in reverse. Tischner argues that drama is not merely a literary genre, but the very shape of our lives. According to him, the ethical encounter with the other, and ultimately with God through the other, is a drama that determines whether our individual and collective lives lead to either salvation or damnation. It is about the sort of people we become through ethical action and what sorts of worlds we build through it. In short, Tischner's philosophy is best summed up by Deuteronomy. I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. Choose life then, that you and your descendants may live. And now for my introduction of our panelists. And I'll do it in the order that they will be presenting. So Artur Grabowski is a poet, playwright, prose writer, essayist, and dramatist. He has published 7 books of poetry, a collected volume of his poems, several plays for theater, a novel and short stories, and 5 collections of literary essays. He studied Polish and comparative literature, literary theory, and philosophy at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, where he is currently professor in the Polish department, teaching modern literature, theater, creative writing, and heading up the postgraduate program. As a visiting professor, he taught at the University of Illinois in Chicago and SUNY in Buffalo, then as a Fulbright Scholar at the University of Washington in Seattle, my alma mater. Additionally, he spent 4 months at Nehru University in New Delhi, India, as a European Commission scholar, and then taught at Delhi University. Artur occasionally works for the theater and translates poetry from the English and Italian. Next is Paweł Rojek. He is a philosopher and sociologist, just making sure, and the former editor-in-chief of the Polish intellectual journal Prasy. He teaches analytical metaphysics at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow and works on Russian religious philosophy and the Polish Catholic intellectual tradition. His first book, Semiotics of Solidarity, was devoted to a comparative analysis of the discourse produced by the Polish trade union Solidarity in the 1980s when Tischner was its informal chaplain. His book, The Liturgy of History, explores the influence of Polish Romantic Messianism on the literary, philosophical, and theological works of Karol Wojtyła, then John Paul II. In his book, he also offered a new interpretation of Tischner's philosophy of work. His book on the geopolitical imagination in Russia, The Curse of Empire, has been published in Polish and Czech, and will hopefully be published in English soon. He is currently working on a book on Paweł Florensky's Trinitarian ontology. Last but not least, Krzysztof Zanussi is a Polish film and theater director, producer, and screenwriter. Born in Warsaw in 1939, Zanussi studied at the National Film School in Łódź before going on to direct 84 movies, television series, and short films. Zanussi was the recipient of the jury prize at the 1980 Cannes Film Festival for The Constant Factor, the Golden Lion at the 1984 Venice Film Festival for A Year of the Quiet Sun. Zanussi is also professor of European film at the European Graduate School in Switzerland, where he conducts a summer workshop, and at the Krzysztof Film School at the University of Silesia in Katowice. In the late 1980s, he co-founded the European Film Academy with Ingmar Bergman. Last year, Zanussi was honored with the Camera Image Lifetime Achievement Award in recognition of his work and impact on Polish and world cinema. On Saturday, the conference will be screening his latest work, The Perfect Number, and we also have kind of rare archival footage that Mr. Zanussi took of Tishner, I think in the 1980s. It will be in German, but you will get a sense of the sort of person that he was. So without further ado, if we would welcome Artur Grabowski.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I would start from somehow referring to this short introduction of which Artur made about the book. He said about the content generally, but once we have the title, Philosophy of Drama, I mean, first what came to my mind, I was afraid that most of you probably came here to see what the philosophy of drama as a theatrical work, as a piece of art. And so what we should start with is probably to say what kind, to ask the question, what kind of philosophical subject, what kind of philosophical problem drama is. And once we are reading this book, we can see that drama is flanked like from two opposite sides in this book. One side is, I would say, that's a theology, or the theological reflections or theological references. References is probably the best word to use, because God and religion is mentioned here, but it's mentioned like a point of reference to any other reflections, to any other philosophical analysis. It is very clear that Tishner takes into consideration the existence of God and his influence on whatever the human existence, etc. But it's not his intention to discuss directly theological subject. So this is the we can say in this triptych is a kind of the left panel of his references. The opposite panel would be called literature, or generally arts. He refers directly, and he even devotes a large part of his book to discuss Shakespeare and Dostoevsky, Kierkegaard as a writer, not so much as a philosopher. So he takes examples from literary works, from arts as such, we can say, to discuss again the philosophical anthropology subject, which is the main, we can say. So it is like we have drama in these three sections, we can say, in these three panels of the triptych. The theology and art on the flanks, and the philosophical anthropology, especially or predominantly ethics, in a center. Finally, if you read this book, it has, of course, the dimension of a serious philosophical work, but the language of this book is more like an essay, like a literary essay, and I believe it's intentional, because Tishner wants to to make his writing more accessible. I mean, accessible to the reader who's, okay, educated, but not necessarily concentrated on particular philosophical subject or dialogues or polemics or anything like that. I would even suspect that there is a kind of the practical intention in this book. Once there is not such a manual for life, but anyway, his ethical reflection is very easily, I believe, is very easily it could be very easily translated into a real ethical practice of the social life. And when I'm saying the social, it means that the ethics of Tischner is very much concentrated on the relationship much more than the ethics of the individual. So this is like this kind of a practice, is very much emphasized here. But there is one thing strictly philosophical which I would like to mention, is his reference to ontology. Because once it is ethical, anthropological, even sometimes aesthetics, because he's also discussing beauty, beauty as a subject which is somehow in between ethics and aesthetics. But there is also kind of the ontological background in this book. Generally, he uses the phenomenology as a method of his research, and he's transcending it, he's developing it, he's using it very, one can say, subjectively. But anyway, there is ontology is always kind of a shadow of this book. From one hand, we can see that this is a kind of the anti-ontological approach. He would like to reflect on the real existential practice of a human being more than asking for how those practices are grounded or founded in a question of being itself. But from the other hand, we can see that it is really exactly, essentially, a philosophy of values, the philosophy of the horizon to which we should refer in our practical, ethical decisions, choices, etc. But it comes out the question how those values exist. I mean, where are they grounded? In what kind of metaphysical field, or physical, or let's say social, whatever, political. So the question of the foundation of those values is always in the focus of his reflection. If briefly saying, from my opinion, is that for him there is the ground for the values is a real existence, is a human existence. That's not so much the question of being itself in, let's say, Heideggerian way, but the more like existentialists saying about the existence of a human being. And now in this way, he raises the polemic both with the Thomist ontology from one hand, and from the other hand, through phenomenology, he stands out the polemics with the materialistic existentialism, let's say like Sartre and all of this school. So again, you see, this is like the task he puts on himself, is to find out the third way somehow between the hard ontology, hard metaphysics, and the resignation of any metaphysics in materialistic existentialism. And the new ground for him is a relationship between two really existing, we can say, human individuals. And the individual is, of course, is kind of the result of these relationship. The relationship is, again, in the kind of triptych. This relationship is and there are like two features of the typically human relationship. One of them he calls dialogue. The other one he calls witness. So between these two, there is a reality, we can say, the somehow ontological reality for grounding the values. And what came to my mind, finally, when discussing drama in between philosophy and arts, the other triptych, so forgive me, I like this number, 3. So that's a kind of my thinking. If we take into consideration some great Polish figures, from one hand we have Karol Wojtyła, the future Pope and Saint, and his book, philosophical book, The Acting Man. On the other flank, the opposite flank, who came to my mind was Jerzy Grotowski, a man of theater, a very famous avant-garde director, whose main idea was a total act. So, well, when I see these two flunking, we can say, the acting man or the interhuman action as described by Tishner in his book, we can see that it is really something in between theology or theological anthropology and pure art. And it's also, I'm finishing, okay. And it's also interesting if you look at the biographies of those two flunking, individuals. Karol Wojtyła, the future Pope, he began his, involvement into spirituality as an actor, as a theater man. Then he was a playwright. Then he became a priest. Then he became a pope, a leader of the congregation, we can say. And finally signed a spiritual leader in metaphysical sense. And if you look at the career of Jerzy Grotowski, he began as an artist of theater. Then, producing just 4 famous, productions, he left theater and he devoted himself into philosophical writing. Once we read his essays, they are purely philosophical. And then he became a leader, a kind of a spiritual leader. It was kind of his ambition, and he was taken for his believers, we can say, as a spiritual leader. The last 2 minutes. This is what, for me, it is very typical, when we see that. And when discussing Tishner, we see that he was a philosopher by education, we can say. He was a priest, an active priest. I do remember as a student, participating in the mass led by him as a priest. And finally, as a philosopher of ethics, he became kind of a spiritual leader for the solidarity movement, as Artur mentioned, So you see, this kind of the link between religion, philosophy, and art is very much, I believe, very much Polish. The roots of these, Polishness, we can say, we can find in Polish poetic drama from the Romantic period. Probably that's the end. I believe Paweł will continue with this reference to Polishness. But what I would like to finish with is that we can see Polish Romanticism very often as a very much chromatic for the foreigners. From the other hand, we can see how universal it was finally once it was so much influential both in theology and arts, and finally in such a book like this. Thank you very much.
As you see, this is a very complex book, since it can be discussed by a film director, one of the greatest Polish directors in 20th century, who was also a colleague of Józef Tischner. They studied philosophy. They attended the same seminary of Roman Garden in Krakow, and the man of theater and the poet and the scholar. My task is very humble, just to introduce the philosophical and historical context of the book, of this book. Indeed, it was written for a wide audience. It was written in a kind of language which was supposed to be popular. I'm not sure whether it is. And my feeling was that Artur made a great, brilliant translation, and my feeling was that translation is sometimes much better than the original Polish text. And since it's more clear, and sometimes this insistence on being understandable from Tischner resulted in very ambiguous and sometimes not clear sentences. Now, I'd like to put this book into two contexts. And I think this is very useful, and it might be seen as a kind of introduction to this book. The first context is general and is philosophical. It is a part of the huge phenomenon in intellectual history of 20th century, of encounter between Christianity, especially Catholicism, with phenomenology. And we have many such examples, and this is one of them. It is important for creating a tradition of Catholic philosophy, and this is one of the pieces in this picture. And the second context, which I think is much more important and much more relevant for us today, is Tischner. In this book and in many other, he expressed his own biography in philosophical and abstract terms. He expressed his own biography, but also he expressed experience of his own community, that is Polish nation, and I would say church in Poland, a Polish local church, experience of resistance against communism in 80s. And when we read the book in this dimension as a expression of this experience, for the first sight it might be seen as just a historical relevance, that it's a document of some kind of peripheral state in Europe somewhere that they struggle with communism. No, I think this is much more important, since communism, that's my thesis, communism was radicalization of modernity, and we are still living in perhaps late modernity, but nevertheless we are still living in the same. We are struggling with the same problem. So the lesson given by Tischner, the lesson given by Solidarity movement in Poland, and in general the lesson of Central and East Europe in 80s and 70s, 80s, and so on, it is a lesson relevant for us today. And I think that the translation is a good time for this translation now, since we much better understand the value of this book than previously. So I would start with the first level, the first context, general context of history of philosophy, history of dialogue between religion and philosophy, Christianity and contemporary philosophy, and more particular between Catholicism and phenomenology. I found Tischner's confession. He wrote a short essay called "What is the philosophy that I practice?" It was written in 1981, and it is a rare document where Tischner says about his own history, and he starts with he described his own way, and it was a way from Thomism. He was at that time it was typical that every priest was supposed to be Thomist, and they were educated as Thomists, and then he abandoned it. It is very important. He stopped to be Thomist and rejected it very firmly. And here's his confession. I openly admit that the shape of my philosophy has been deeply influenced by the conditions under which I have lived and worked. The essence of the matter is very simple. It happened that I began to study philosophy first, and only then did I really meet the man, I mean the reality of society and so on. I started to learn philosophy mainly as Thomism, and I don't think it was bad Thomism. Then came the encounter with the concrete human being. What was the result of this encounter? For me, it resulted in spiritual break with Thomism. At that time in Poland, we have a very serious struggle between Catholicism and communism. Communism had its own philosophy, Marxism, Leninism, which was clear, perfectly elaborated, and understandable, and so on. So there was feeling that we need also have philosophy, that we also need philosophy which would compete with Marxist-Leninism, and the choice was that would be Thomism. Look, we have ism on the one side and ism on the second one. So there was feeling that we have a proposal, alternative proposal, philosophical proposal. It should be Thomism. So it was a general admitted that we educate priests and in the spirit of Thomism. And young Tischner, felt that it's not enough, that we need something more. Of course, there is a great debate, which I'm not going to engage, whether it was real Aquinas. And we know that Aquinas and Thomism is rather difficult relationship. He knew so-called textbook Thomism, textbook. Probably it wasn't real Aquinas. It was kind of textbook for future priests. Nevertheless, he abandoned it since it's too rigid. It's too focused on objects. We need, Tischner says, we need philosophy more focused on relations. We need philosophy focused on persons. We need much more dynamic vision. And he was looking for it and found it in phenomenology. And this is not an accident. In Krakow, we had a great figure of Roman Ingarden. Roman Ingarden was a Polish philosopher, direct student and collaborator of Edmund Husserl, and he came back to Poland and he established in Krakow a school of phenomenology. Krzysztof Zanussi was one of the Ingarden students, and he was sitting on the desk with Josef Tischner at that time. And but Tischner believed that, and similar attitude was in Karol Wojtyła. Wojtyła also, but Wojtyła never rejected Thomism. He tried to combine Thomism and phenomenology. And so in this aspect, Tischner was much more radical. He said, no, Thomism is absolutely dead. He published a paper called The Decline of Thomistic Christianity. That was terrible in Poland. It raised great discussion in Poland and a great distrust to Tischner that he he's a very dangerous man, since he is going to undermine our philosophy, our great philosophy, which is the last hope for us in Poland. But he believed that we need something more adequate to the situation in Poland. It was first Heidegger. It was a philosophy of dialogue, Levinas, Ricoeur, and so on. He tried to use this philosophy to contact with reality. And okay, so this is a large picture of this context of this work. You have a great book by Edward Baring, The Converse to the Real Catholicism and the Making of Continental Philosophy, which says about encounter between Catholicism and phenomenology. Tischner is not mentioned there, since Tischner was the book ends in the middle of 20th century. But I found in Church Life Journal a review of that book by Michael Gapser, who wrote about this book and said that there was also Tischner who, in further years, he also tried to combine phenomenology with Catholicism. And I think this is interesting, but it's not very relevant for us, since it is intellectual history of Catholicism, and I don't think it is important, but I'm not sure whether it is so important to discuss it very in wide sense. I think that much more important was this element of witness, since Tischner tried to express in philosophical terms, abstract terms, this experience of resistance against communism. And this is, I think, much more interesting and relevant for us. And again, one quotation for his own autobiography. And since he said that the encounter with man, encounter with reality, challenged my Thomism, and I needed to find something, a new philosophy. But then it happened that he realized that the philosophy of dialogue and existentialism, it's not enough for Polish experience. When I was faced with our crisis of hope is the name of the situation in Poland, I had to invent and coin words on my own. I was persuaded to do the opposite. I was told, we must make ourselves known to the world, enter into an international dialogue, show that we too understand hermeneutics, historicity, and the revelation of the faith. That's Levinas. This was a beautiful temptation, but impossible for me to realize. I do not intend to save hopes of Germans by introducing them to Husserl, nor to save the hopes of French by teaching them Bergson or Ricoeur. I have chosen to be narrow-minded and dumb philosopher of Sarmatians. Sarmatians is allegedly, according to legend, is a tribe from which Poles come. I want to be a dumb philosopher for Polish people, for my community. I try to think for them, for Polish, and to give them good advice. Fortunately, they don't listen to me very much, so I don't feel very guilty. But what is important, he believed that I'm a servant of my community, and I need to express and influence to that situation in Poland. And and the universal philosophy and all available categories are not relevant. So I introduce my new language and new categories. And this is the result of these attempts. And I think that it's opposite to Tischner, since he believed that when I focus on Polish experience, I wouldn't be understandable for any other people in the world. So they have their own problems. We have our specific topics and specific situation, and I would be speaking only for Poles. And he was mistaken. I firmly believe that he was wrong, since from the perspective of half of century, I think that this experience is much more relevant than his general discussion about phenomenology and Christianity. No, this experience of rebellion against totalitarianism, this experience of rebellion against modernity, since again, communism was radicalization of modernity, it is a lesson for us. We are living in different situation, of course, but in some sense, this is very similar. The crucial point in communism in Poland was the division between private and public. In private, you can be Catholic, but public sphere is is absolutely is dominated by ideology and by the atheistic ideology. So the mechanism of solidarity movement was to reintroduce our true selves into the public sphere, and he described it very clearly and in philosophical terms, and I think that unfortunately it's still relevant for us today. Thank you.
And now for Mr. Zanussi.
Yes, I'm afraid it's my turn. I'm here not as a scholar, not as an academician, but just as somebody who was sitting next to Tischner when I studied. So I have to give you some testimony about him as a man, and if my words are not enough, maybe later, by the end of my, I hope, short expose, I will show you a little fragment of a film with Tischner on the screen. He was not very often filmed, and I have such a fragment for you. But maybe first, the context. It's probably hard for you to understand what does it mean, state religion. However, Catholics had this experience, but in past century. In my life, Marxism was a state religion. It was taught on all levels. You could not be a medical doctor or an engineer if you don't pass exam on Marxism. So it was absolutely intolerable to have other views than Marxist views, except very isolated circle of Catholic intellectuals who, after the thaw in '56, had some limited space of expression. But when you look on the late 50s, time when I, well, the early 60s, when I studied philosophy in Krakow, between Elbau, the river that divides Germany, Eastern and German, up to Kamchatka or Sakhalin on Pacific Ocean, there was no university that was not Marxist. Marxism was absolutely mandatory. And after some changes, the thaw that happened in '56, one exception happened, and it was in Krakow, that a professor, the already mentioned Professor Ingarden, a disciple of Husserl, and a colleague of Edith Stein, now saint, he was allowed to reopen Faculty of Philosophy according to the non-Marxist curriculum. The most funny recollection I have, and I wonder if younger gentlemen know about it, because nobody wrote about such a little trick, that we had a department of philosophy, and it was all non-Marxist, phenomenological, and there was a part for these teachers of compulsory Marxism. And this division was very subtle, but the doorman was asking when you were entering, whom do you look for, philosophers or Marxists? And it was a clear-cut division. However, it was never on writing. So the attraction of non-state religion, but Christian religion, was particularly strong. I have another recollection of this time. This is my private. I got by mistake to my pocket when I went to the primary school my photograph, a picture in the church. And my colleague has noticed it and started to scream, asking our teacher, denouncing me that I'm frequenting the church. So before the teacher has appeared, I've eaten this picture. It has an awful taste. But I wanted you to understand the kind of pressure that under which we were living, and Tischner was particularly, how would I say, disturbing figure when he became, and he was becoming very, very, very soon, very popular. He was disturbing because he was representing poor peasants from the mountains. He was not a typical academic. He was not brought up in intellectual circle, but he was a man of people. Marxists believed that they represent people. So what is he doing? What right he has to speak in a way that simple people liked him and understood him. He wrote some of his philosophical preaching in dialect, and this dialect was typical for our mountaineers. So this was very, very, he was, by this element of choice of a language, already popular. Other thing is that he was a man who liked anecdotes and jokes. Not that many philosophers have sense of humor, rather few, to my experience. And I remember, probably half of the nation knows the distinction he was doing, asking an old mountaineer, what do you do when you have plenty of time? And the mountaineer answers, I sit and I think. And when you don't have much time, I only sit. So this was kind of a language he was producing and attracting big amount of people who wanted to hear philosophy expressed in a non-academic way, like Socrates did. Roman Ingarden, his master, and my master at that time, was, as a phenomenologist, was absolutely far away from any debate with Marxists, while Tischner did go directly to the debate. Ingarden died relatively early. He was struck by a car, so it was an accident. And the department of philosophy survived, was not reformed in the Marxist way. It remained the same as before. I took another note of one of the Tischner sayings. He was asking people, don't call me late at night because I sleep unless there is news that celibacy has been cancelled. So you can imagine that this kind of philosopher was very popular with people, even if, let us say, simple people don't read philosophy. In fact, they do. And what is, to me, so important is this reference to drama, because it is opening great polemic with you, young generation, people living in wealth, in luxury, and in a very safe situation. I am quite aware how much unsafe you feel, but comparing to the experience of the war and long communist domination, what you have is paradise. And that's why what we feel is the common attitude rejecting dramaticity of life. We see it even in arts. It is difficult with political correctness that suffocates the conflict. We have problems with novels, with scripts, because they have no conflict. Everybody is right, and they only dialogue, but they don't fight. While in life, there is fight, and there is no way to forget it, to avoid it. Only there is a difference what kind of fight, such as we know from, let us say, prehistorical era, on such elegant fight like Olympic Games. But this is always fight. And I think another person who is often considered as somebody who plays a little bit similar role to Tischner is a man whom I met also here at your university, is Czech philosopher and priest, Professor Halik. And we owe him a very good expression. He speaks about Christianity without cross, without suffering, without pain. Christianity of full belly. When you are not afraid of hunger, your outlook on life changes dramatically. And dramaticity was something that Tischner exposed, and you have it in this book, even in the title. It was very much in tune with some remarks that John Paul II did. As you surely know, they were both very close to each other in all levels. They were very, very much friends. It was commonly believed in Poland that after the death of our primate, Archbishop of Warsaw and Gniezno, that Tischner will be a candidate to this post. For some reason, probably because he strongly opposed it, he did not become a Cardinal of Warsaw. But it was likely, it could have happened. And when I see this dialogue between Marxism and phenomenology, that was more handy than Thomism, I see the continuation in John Paul II. And John Paul II, as a young man, just a vicar, priest, he wrote a play in which he confronts Christianity with Marxism and introduces a character of Lenin. Look, the future Pope writes words for the leader of world communism. I think it is quite remarkable. As you guess, I got a monitoring notice that I am too long, so I am ready to stop any moment. But maybe it would make you more close to the person if you watch now this fragment of the film I shot for German television, not for Polish. Polish television didn't want Tischner to be seen because he was very likable on screen, and as much as in life. And let me conclude with the last joke I remember, when Tischner himself, a man with an athletic silhouette, became deadly sick. And for the last meeting with the Pope when he visited Poland, Tischner arrived, and as Pope was driven in a car called Papamobile, Tischner wrote Tischner Mobile on his wheelchair. So please let us screen this fragment if it is ready. It was a part of a documentary about Krakow and its cultural life, shot for German television. Of course, Western German.
Kandidaten für geistliches Amt. Wie sieht es aus im Seminar in Krakau? Naja, wir haben hier in Krakau 2 Gebäude, ja, und alle sind überwiegend. Wir haben ungefähr 230 Alumnen und jetzt wir haben schon mehr als 60 Kandidaten ins erste Jahr noch Jahrgeflagge führen müssten jetzt die Kandidaten nach anderen Diözesen verweisen. Ja? Ich muss sagen, dass
in Krakow you have more candidates
2 Millionen
for Greece than in other
also,
universities.
das ist, kann man sagen, Rekord. Das ist natürlich nach Besuch des Papstes.
Und haben Sie persönliche Erinnerungen, sagen Sie, an
Ja,
Papst?
ja, war mein, kann man sagen, Chef.
All right, so you
Ja.
have
Aber ich erinnere mich vor allem die Vorträge. Als ich studierte hier in Krakau, begannen die Vorträge und das war auch paradox. Die Vorträge waren von Sozialethik. Ja, also das ist kein Spezielle, ja. Aber einmal, ich erinnere mich, das war ein Tag des heiligen Franz von Assisi. Ja. Er sagte ungefähr so, wir sprechen hier viele über das Geld, über Ökonomie, über Politik und so weiter, als ob diese Sachen wären die wichtigsten Sachen. Und er sagte, aber meiner Meinung nach, das sind nicht die wichtigsten Sachen. Und Heilige Franz hat uns gesagt, hat uns gezeigt, dass die wichtigste ist Armut. Wo Armut ist, dort ist Freiheit. Und er betonte,
there is poverty, there is also freedom. And when you're independent, possessing, you lose your freedom. Now, as St. Francis said.
Armut ist dort Freiheit ist. Ja, und ich höre jetzt, wie er hat das gesagt. Und er hat gesagt auch, wir müssen jetzt die Welt vom Kopf auf Füße.
We must turn the world upside down. Okay, that must be it.
Well, since Tishner did write about the face, I thought it was only appropriate that we did show his face, even if you could not understand the language. I think you kind of get a little bit of the sense of the sort of engaging person and part of his attraction and the attraction of his philosophy, even where he's telling jokes in German when his native language is Polish. So now we have about 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A. So if you have any questions. And feel free to ask our panel, and if you have any questions for the translator, I'm happy to field them.
Hi, thank you all so much for your presentation. You mentioned Tishner as like a chaplain of the Solidarity movement. I also know that Jerzy Paweł was also considered a chaplain of the Solidarity movement in Warsaw, and I was just wondering if they ever like crossed paths or knew each other, or if they had any kind of relationship.
We know they met in Krakow. We know since Solidarity movement was a huge movement with almost 10 million of members. So it was absolute, and there was no particular office of chaplain of Solidarity. So there were many priests involved, and Paweł was one of the iconic person of this murdered by communists with a great cruelty. And they met, but Paweł was a preacher. He was not a philosopher, he was not a thinker, he was a witness of this solidarity movement, whereas Tischner was much more focused on philosophy, on this, and he was from academic world. But they met, we know it from Popiełuszko's diary, that they met in Krakow. He was traveling, and they was absolutely brotherhood and the same goals, but the fate were different.
Just one thing to add. When we are talking about his Christian spiritual leadership for solidarity movement, we have to remember that the beginning of any anti-communist resistance in Poland began not in Christianity, but the group of these intellectuals who led the beginning, we can say, of this movement of workers. They were like revisionists of Marxism. So if we call a priest, a leader of this movement, it was a great change which had been made in the end of the 70s and the beginning of the 80s. It was a different movement.
Hi, thank you guys so much for this panel. I'm new to this whole historical movement, and I can't wait to learn more, actually. One of the things that struck me was that there seems to be, and pardon me if I'm brushing with too broad a strokes here, but there seems to be kind of an analogous relationship with modernity that you see in some of the ressourcement theologians. Do you know if there were any cross-pollinations between any of the ressourcement theologians? Kind of that pushback against modernity, but also the pushback against the kind of the prevailing orthodoxy, the Thomism of the day.
I'm not sure, analogy between...
How can I describe this?
Sorry.
I'm just thinking of the push towards personalism, the push towards we need a relationship, more relational theology, a push towards kind of away from the manualist type of theology.
You mean in Thomism or in Tischner?
In Tischner, yeah, Tischner.
In Tischner. Yeah, I'm not sure that I understand that properly, but of course there is a tension between, and there's a great debate, since one of the accusations made by Tischner to Thomistic philosophy was that it is based on substance, that it is based on objects and so on. And now we are much more, we see this clearly that in fact true Aquinas is much more relational. That every object has its own essence, which is not from itself. It is in dynamic relation to the creator and so on. So now we have, I think, much more sophisticated picture of Aquinas. But at that time, this Thomas, which he learned, which he knew, was much more artificial and textbooked. But perhaps this might be important. It wasn't so-called neo-scholasticism, but it was the Thomism which was prevailing at that time in Poland was this French Thomism of Etienne Gilson and Jacques Maritain. So it was quite good philosophy, but even this kind of Thomism for Tischner was not enough. But I think that it might be we can somehow reconcile Tischner and Aquinas to find many similar topics, but Aquinas in this new light of his profound metaphysics, relational metaphysics.
Well, maybe just to add as the translator, I think the encounter with phenomenology and personalistic philosophy was something that they all shared in common, especially given that a lot of the ressourcement thinkers came from France. They would have encountered all these things, plus Buber, who's also an influence on Tischner, somewhat indirectly, but also like through Levinas. So it's like a common intellectual atmosphere that they're drawing upon.
Thank you, gentlemen, for coming today. I really appreciated the talk. For Dr. Zanussi, you mentioned when you're not afraid of hunger, your philosophy of life dramatically changes. I wanted to ask you, so hunger is a baseline feeling that ensures we obtain what is necessary for survival and thriving. How do we, in this comfortable world, nourish and look for that drive, that hunger, and the necessity of finding food and nourishment provides for the individual? How do we inculcate those values in our comfortable world?
Well, I think basically gospel gives us an answer. If our goal is to serve, we move towards another human being because we want to serve his or her needs. And that's what is essential. What is our intention? If we live oriented towards our self-fulfillment, our well-being, then we are living for ourselves. We don't serve. When you serve, you do what your vocation is. And this is vocation of every human being. Serve the others and serve the development, serve good and not evil. But in each situation it has different meaning. But it means definitely sacrifice. There is no life without sacrifice. If you deny need of sacrifice, you deny whole system of values which keeps us alive on this planet. By the way, when I mentioned that future Pope, as a young writer, wrote a dialogue for Lenin and a Christian in conflict, for some time they go together when they protest against the injustice of the world. But then Marxist says, Lenin, I can do all to help working class to win. And the Christian says, but I must find the face of Christ in every of these beggars whom I serve. It is far more bigger issue to find Christ's face in every human being.
Yes, thank you for talking. I guess my question, not really, you mentioned the radicalization of modernity and kind of how do you see that playing in today's society as it did in communist Poland, and how would like a Tishner-esque reaction to that look like?
Well, we desperately need another Tishner, another Halik, and most of all we need another St. Francis from Assisi. If we don't find one, another Martin Luther will come and we'll have more problems because there is enough evil around us.
Hi, this is a question for Mr. Zanussi. In your film Life for Life, I found that the way that you depict the life of Maximilian Kolbe almost entirely through dialogue with those who knew him is rather than as a straight dramatic portrait. I personally found that more impactful, and I felt I learned more about the man than in what would be a more standard dramatic model. And I'm wondering how philosophy impacted your choices about how you approach storytelling and the structure of your films.
Well, you know, the real story of Maximilian Kolbe is practically unknown because there were no real witnesses, or witnesses in Auschwitz concentration camp were in such state of mind that they hardly remember all what happened. But the issue is extremely universal. You have it in Albert Camus' novel. Once you are exposed to the danger and you may give your life for the life of another human being, then it is a real love. But each of us is afraid to be exposed to such a test. because I have no idea how would I react myself, and I don't have such a confidence in myself to say for sure I will behave in the right way. Probably not.
So I'm curious about this sort of emphasis on witness that you've all talked about, that Tishner clearly had, and sort of the context, in the context of like this metaphysical relationality, and sort of whether you think there is an ontological reality which is relationship, and whether Tishner would be willing to admit that or sort of dialogue with that, or if you would think that he would just sort of reject that.
The sequel for the philosophy of drama, it might be an advice for the Notre Dame University Press. There is a sequel for philosophy of drama. It is called The Controversy Over the Existence of Man. It is a collection of essays, the last works published by Tishner in his life, and the last essay in this collection is about Holy Trinity. And he says that Holy Trinity in contemporary understanding, and he says, well, I can find everything what I was looking for in philosophy in this dogma of Trinitarian dogma, which says about persons in relations, which says about persons who are constituted by relations to each other. And he says, I was looking for that. And this is, unfortunately, this is the last chapter of the last book, and he died a few months later after the release of this book. But it shows the direction that we can, and this is a very popular trend now, and so-called relational ontology or a Trinitarian ontology, and so which tries to. Since usually, especially in Aquinas, we had the concept of person, human person, and divine person. In divine persons, relations were crucial, and that persons were relations in fact. But it was closed only for this divine reality. And the intuitions, Tishner's intuitions, and as well in many other authors, was that in fact human persons are similar in that aspect of relationality. And I think this is the testament, Tishner's testament, that we should look for philosophy which is inspired by theology in this aspect, and we can find a basis, Christian basis for ethics, and also for ontology, since it is a pattern which you can see in many other places. And I think this is the last words of Tishner is opening the perspective for collaboration between theology and philosophy, especially taking anthropology directly from Trinitarian theology. And I think this is great. This is a great program.
Just something to mention about that. He's trying to describe this kind of the metaphysical or ontological background through the real examples. That's why he brings examples from literature, from which describes, we can say, reality of human life. And maybe the term which describes better this kind of ontological background is encounter than the dialogue, because encounter is what occurs in the existential reality when you encounter the other. So the other is first, and me comes next as a reaction. And this kind of reaction reveals something what we find, emotionally as real. That's the very much like, practical philosophical research.
Thank you. I hope I can word this right. I'm curious, you said that Wojtyła and Tishner were close friends and worked closely together. So I'm wondering what happened such that Wojtyła did not reject Thomism and Tishner did. What did Wojtyła see in Thomism that was still, I guess, useful in expressing human experience that Tishner did not? Why was that not? Why do they have different choices there?
The first answer is that generations, since Wojtyła was much, they belong to different generations, and perhaps this is a Father Fergus Kerr, Dominican from British Dominican, who wrote about history of Catholic theology. He said that most probably Wojtyła did not knew Thomism, in fact, since he was in underground seminary and he was not given lectures in Thomism in a regular way. He just need to read a book on Thomism and to pass an exam. So he was not influenced so deeply by Thomism, and perhaps he had a different vision of it. He was not deeply changed by this textbook Thomism. So perhaps this is the answer, and perhaps also the situation at that time Wojtyła was a bishop and he had to be faithful to the situation in Poland and so on, and Tishner was he could be much more radical.
Well, this is, do we want to? Okay, this is all the time we have. We do have books in the back for those of you who might be interested, and I'd just like to say that it was really heartening to see such a lively dialogue that I think Tishner would have enjoyed his book sparking. And all that remains is to thank our esteemed guests. Thank you.